I remember the letter as if it were yesterday, its elegant script and the formal seal that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just any letter. It came from the Duke of Valtoria, inviting me to come teach the royal children in his kingdom, a land I had only heard whispered of in the corridors of Europe. Dear Miss Annabel Sinclair, I trust this letter finds you in good health. I murmured to myself, though I already knew the rest. The invitation was unlike any I had ever received. It was 1860, and I, Annabel Sinclair, a school teacher from London, had been summoned to Valtoria, a country tucked away in Eastern Europe. A place I couldn't quite picture, but one that held the promise of something more, something that felt bigger than me. I packed my bags with trepidation, leaving behind the cobbled streets of London for the unknown. Little did I know, the people of Valtoria and the mysteries of their royal court would change my life forever. When I first saw Valtoria, I was struck by the contrast. Rolling hills, misty mornings, and the majestic mountain range looming in the distance. The royal palace itself sat nestled at the heart of the kingdom, a towering structure that seemed to command the land around it. But despite its beauty, there was an air of tension here, a feeling of unrest I couldn't quite shake. Duke Ilian Dragon, the ruler of Valtoria, was a man of contradictions. He was reserved yet forward-thinking, commanding yet thoughtful. He ruled with an iron fist, but had an undeniable grace. His eyes were constantly searching for something, but it was clear he was weighed down by the burden of leadership, particularly as his kingdom faced both internal and external threats. When I first met him, I felt the full weight of his presence, his gaze cold yet intense. But there was something in the way he spoke of Valtoria's future that stirred something in me, a desire to help, to be part of the change he sought. The royal children were unlike any I had ever met. The eldest, Prince Maximilian, was ambitious but brooding, with a mind as sharp as a sword and a temper to match. Princess Elena, the youngest, was warm and thoughtful, yet always seemed to be in the shadows of her brother's brilliance. There was also young Prince Victor, a boy full of curiosity, who had more questions than I had answers. I soon realized that my role wasn't simply to teach them history or the ways of the world. It was to shape them, guide them through the uncertain waters of royal life, and prepare them for the future of Valtoria, a future that seemed increasingly in doubt. But it wasn't just the children who intrigued me, it was the court. The people who surrounded the Duke, each with their own agendas, their own secrets. Among them was a woman who would change everything, Mariana, the Duke's beloved, a woman whose presence seemed to cast a shadow over every decision the Duke made. Mariana was everything I was not, bold, beautiful, and seemingly untouchable. The Duke's affection for her was obvious, but there was something in the air that told me their relationship wasn't as simple as it seemed. One evening, as I walked through the palace gardens, I overheard a conversation between the Duke and one of his advisors. They spoke of a marriage alliance, a powerful union that could secure Valtoria's place in Europe. But it was clear that the Duke was conflicted. His love for Mariana was real, but it seemed at odds with the political realities of his position. I knew then that the future of Valtoria depended on more than just royal decisions. It depended on the tangled webs of relationships that had been spun long before I ever arrived. Valtoria was not an isolated land. Its borders were contested and its alliances fragile. The Duke's ambition to modernize the kingdom had placed him in the middle of a delicate political situation, where every decision seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The tension with neighboring countries was palpable, and the looming threat of war seemed unavoidable. As the kingdom's plans to ally with the neighboring kingdom of Dornia became more concrete, I found myself caught up in discussions about Valtoria's future. The Duke often asked me for advice, but I could see the strain on his face. He was a man torn between the future of his people and the personal cost of his decisions. "I want what's best for my people," he confessed to me one evening, after yet another tense council meeting. "But every path I see leads to something I don't want to face." His words hung in the air, unanswered. He was, after all, a ruler responsible for an entire kingdom. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw the human behind the title, a man struggling under the weight of his crown. Over time, the distance between the Duke and me seemed to shrink. What had started as professional admiration slowly blossomed into something else, something I couldn't explain. There were stolen moments between us, when the world outside seemed to disappear. He began to confide in me, not just about Valtoria, but about his own dreams, his doubts, and his loneliness. But there was always an unspoken barrier between us, a divide that neither of us dared cross. The Duke had a duty to his people, to his kingdom, and I was an outsider, a teacher from another land. We could never be more than this, a fleeting connection in a world that demanded too much from both of us. As Valtoria's alliances shifted, so too did the pressure on the Duke. Dornia, with its powerful army and vast resources, became an increasingly attractive ally. But at what cost? The Duke was being pulled in 100 directions, and I could see the toll it was taking on him. His nights were restless, his decisions weighed with the potential to change the kingdom forever. One evening, as I sat with him in his study, the weight of the world seemed to press down upon him. "I must make a decision, Annabelle," he said, his voice strained. "And I don't know if it's the right one." I didn't know what to say. In that moment, I realized that the Duke's choices were no longer just political. They were personal, and they would shape the future of not just Valtoria, but of us all. The war with Dornia loomed ever closer, and the Duke's decisions became more desperate. The political intrigue deepened, and the alliances that had once seemed so secure began to unravel. The people of Valtoria were divided, and I found myself standing on the front lines of a war not just of nations, but of ideals. The Duke confided in me one last time before the storm broke loose. "I've done everything I could, Annabelle," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But sometimes duty requires a sacrifice, and I'm afraid that sacrifice might be everything I hold dear." And in that moment, I realized just how much he had given up. Not just his kingdom, but his heart. The war with Dornia became inevitable, and as the kingdom's fate hung in the balance, I found myself at a crossroads. The Duke had made his choice. His duty to his people came before his personal desires. But I had my own choice to make. Did I stay and see this through, or did I leave before the storm consumed us all? The days grew darker, and the choices I faced became harder. And in the end, the question wasn't just about duty. It was about love, and whether love could survive in a world ruled by power and politics. In the end, I left Valtoria. The war had claimed what was left of the kingdom's hopes, and the Duke had made peace with the sacrifices he had to make. But as I boarded the ship bound for London, I couldn't shake the memories of the man who had been both ruler and human. A man who had taught me that the greatest battles are often the ones we fight within ourselves. Valtoria's future remained uncertain, but I knew one thing for certain. The kingdom would never be the same. And neither would I. Ready to improve your English in a fun and engaging way? Start learning through stories today. Subscribe to Learn with Godson and dive into captivating stories that will help you expand your vocabulary, understand sentence structures, and practice pronunciation. Stories make learning English exciting and memorable. Join us on this journey and watch your language skills grow with each story. The voiceover in this video is given by Learn with Godson. Copying or re-uploading is prohibited.